Every
No
journey
distress
has an
beacon
end,
registered the failure.
but some
No
ends are
alarm
just
in
the
any
beginning.
database, imperial
Prepare
or
for the
otherwise,
ultimate
could have
battle.
predicted it. One moment the Tyrant's Wake-class Star Destroyer and its escort wing tore through hyperspace on a heading toward the Outer Rim, fleeing the wreckage of a rebel ambush above Kessel. The next, the stars themselves seemed to scream, and something that was not quite space, not quite the Force, not quite anything catalogued in Imperial astrogation charts, swallowed them whole. Grand Moff Tarkin would have called it a malfunction. Vader, standing at the bridge viewport as the hyperspace tunnel fractured into impossible colors, felt something different ripple through the Force itself, a wrongness, a tearing, as if reality had been asked a question it did not know how to answer. The Star Destroyer Tyrant's wake groaned under stresses no Durasteel hull was built to survive. 3 TIE squadrons lost cohesion in the chaos, their pilots screaming over comms that cut to static and then to silence. When the light cleared, the stars outside the bridge viewport were arranged in patterns no navicomputer recognized. This was not the galaxy they had left. Vader said nothing for a long moment. He did not need instruments to tell him something fundamental had changed. He felt it in the Force, which here moved differently, thinner in some places, stranger in others, like a current running through unfamiliar water. Captain Ardis Wren, commanding officer of the Tyrant's Wake, broke the silence first, his voice clipped with the practiced calm of a man who had learned never to show fear to his Sith master. "My lord, sensors are recalibrating. We have no match for any star chart in our database." "Then chart new ones," Vader said. The words carried no panic, only the cold patience of a man who had survived worse uncertainties than this. "Send scouts. I want to know what we have found, and what has found us." Light years away, though distance itself was a strange and uncertain concept in this newly tangled corner of reality. The USS Enterprise decruised at standard patrol velocity through a quiet stretch of Federation space, its long-range sensors humming with the unremarkable business of exploration. Captain Jean-Luc Picard stood at the center of his bridge, hands clasped behind his back, reviewing a routine report on a subspace anomaly detected 3 days prior, a tear in the fabric of local spacetime that Starfleet science vessels had been monitoring with cautious curiosity. "Counselor," Picard said, glancing toward Deanna Troi, "your impressions of the anomaly readings?" "Something's different about it now, Captain," Troi said, her brow furrowing with the particular unease that came not from sensors, but from something deeper. "I can't explain it. It feels occupied." It was Data, ever precise, who delivered the confirmation moments later. "Captain, long-range sensors are detecting multiple large vessels emerging from the anomaly. Energy signatures are unlike anything in Starfleet records. Estimated mass and configuration suggest military design. Heavily armed, heavily armored." Picard's expression did not change, though something behind his eyes sharpened. 24 years of command had taught him the value of stillness in the face of the unknown. "Red alert. Helm, set an intercept course. Cautious approach only. Mr. Worf, raise shields, but weapons stay holstered until I say otherwise. We are explorers first." The bridge crew moved with practiced efficiency, the soft chime of red alert washing over consoles already alive with unfamiliar data. On the main view screen, the image resolved, a fleet unlike any the Federation had charted. Vast, wedge-shaped vessels bristling with batteries of unknown weaponry, smaller fighter craft swarming in defensive formation, all of it radiating a kind of cold, deliberate menace that needed no universal translator to understand. Aboard the Tyrant's Wake, the scout reports came back grim and strange. No Imperial holdings. No record of any Republic, new or old. No trace of the Rebellion, the Jedi, or even the Sith beyond Vader himself. Worse, and more insulting to Imperial pride, sensors detected an approaching vessel of unfamiliar design, broadcasting on frequencies that resembled nothing so much as a diplomatic hail. "They wish to talk," Captain Wren reported, disbelief coloring his voice as the message resolved into translatable basic adjacent speech. A vessel identifying itself as the Enterprise, representing something called the United Federation of Planets. "They request a peaceful exchange of..." "Decline," Vader said, Ren hesitated, just long enough that Vader turned, his mask catching the harsh light of the bridge displays. My lord, if I may, we are stranded, outnumbered in unfamiliar space, with no notion of what forces oppose us here. Diplomacy may. The Empire does not request peace, Vader said. It is offered submission, or it takes what it requires. We do not know the strength of this Federation. We will not announce weakness by asking for it. On the view screen of the Enterprise, Picard watched the wedge-shaped flagship hold position, neither retreating nor advancing, neither answering the hail nor opening fire. Just waiting, with the patience of something ancient and certain of its own power. Captain, Worf said from tactical. No response to our hail. Their weapons remain charged but inactive. Curious, Picard murmured. Whatever they are, they're not afraid of us. And they're not eager to talk either. He straightened, the decision settling into his posture the way it always did before action. Hail them again. Tell them we come in peace, but make clear that peace is a choice, not a weakness. Somewhere in the vast cold dark between the two fleets, the rift that had brought one fragment of an empire across the boundary between universes pulsed once, faintly, like an old wound that had not finished bleeding. Neither side noticed. Both would, eventually, come to regret that they hadn't. If you want to see more characters, enter the Star Wars galaxy. Hit that subscribe button and drop the name of a character you'd want to see in the comments below. The second hail went unanswered for exactly 11 seconds, long enough for Picard to register the silence as a decision rather than a delay. Then the wedge-shaped flagship's weapons batteries, dormant moments before, flared to brilliant green life. Captain. Worf's voice cracked through the bridge like a whip. Incoming fire, multiple batteries, unknown energy signature. Shields. Picard snapped, but the order was already redundant. Worf's hands moved across tactical with the speed of a man who had drilled for exactly this moment 1,000 times and never quite believed it would come. The Enterprise's deflector shields flared as superheated plasma, turbo-laser fire, though no one aboard had a name for it yet, slammed into them with bone-rattling force. The ship shuddered. Lights flickered along the bridge ceiling before emergency power compensated. Shields at 81%, Data reported, his voice maintaining its characteristic calm even as alarms wailed around him. That single impact would have been catastrophic to a vessel without Federation-grade shielding, Captain. Their weapons possess significantly higher destructive yield than standard phaser arrays. Aboard the Tyrant's wake, Captain Wren watched his sensor readout with something between satisfaction and confusion. Direct hit, my lord. Their shields held. A pause. That should not have been possible against a turbo-laser strike of that magnitude. Vader said nothing, but his attention sharpened on the tactical display, on the strange vessel's saucer-an hull silhouette absorbing a blow that should have crippled lesser ships outright. There was something here worth understanding before it was worth destroying. Continue firing. I want to know the limits of their defenses. On the Enterprise's bridge, Picard's jaw tightened, not with fear, but with the particular fury of a man whose attempt at peace had been answered with violence. Return fire, phasers only. Target their weapons batteries. No torpedoes. I will not escalate this beyond what's necessary to make them stop. Captain, Riker said, stepping up beside the command chair, voice low and urgent. With respect, that ship outguns us. We should withdraw and regroup with reinforcements. Noted, number 1. But running shows them exactly what they're looking for, a measure of our weakness. Picard's eyes did not leave the view screen. Fire. Phaser beams lanced out, precise and surgical, finding their mark against the Star Destroyer's forward batteries, where Imperial deflector shields should have shrugged off the strike. Something in the harmonics of phaser energy bit deeper than expected, overloading a relay, sparking a localized power failure along one weapon's emplacement. Wren's report came sharp with alarm this time. Forward battery 7 is offline, my lord. Their weapons, they're not what we expected either. It was, Vader thought, watching the readout with the patience of a predator recalibrating its understanding of prey, an unusually informative exchange of violence. Neither side's weapons behaved as their own doctrine predicted. The Federation's shields held against firepower that should have gutted a Corvette twice over. The Empire's own shields in turn sparked and strained under phaser fire that should have been a child's toy compared to a turbolaser bolt. "Cease fire," Vader said abruptly. Ren blinked behind his console, surprised enough to hesitate before relaying the order. "My lord, they are not yet beaten, and we are not yet certain of our own strength here. There is no profit in spending it carelessly." Vader turned from the viewport, his cape settling around him like a closing curtain. "Open a channel. I will speak with them myself." The bridge crew of the Enterprise watched, weapons still hot, as the Star Destroyer's batteries fell silent and a new signal, heavily distorted, carrying a presence that made even Data's positronic sensors register something like unease, resolved on the comm. "This is the voice of the Galactic Empire," it said, mechanical and resonant, carrying weight that had nothing to do with volume. "You have shown more resilience than I expected. Identify your authority and your intentions before I decide whether this exchange continues." Picard rose from his chair, smoothing his uniform with a single deliberate motion, meeting the unseen voice's challenge with his own measured calm. "I am Captain Jean-Luc Picard of the United Federation of Planets, representing the Enterprise and the principles of peaceful exploration and mutual respect among sovereign worlds. You fired on a vessel that offered you nothing but an open hand. I would ask you to explain that before we discuss anything else." There was a pause, long enough that Troy, still monitoring the channel, felt something shift in the emotional undercurrent of the exchange, though she couldn't have said exactly what. Then the voice returned, colder now, almost amused. "An open hand, in my experience, Captain, is rarely offered without a blade hidden behind it. I have ruled an empire built upon the wreckage of such naivety." Another pause, deliberate, theatrical in its menace. "But you intrigue me. Very few who fire upon my fleet do so with restraint rather than desperation. Perhaps there is more to discuss than war." On the Enterprise bridge, Riker exchanged a glance with Troy, the kind of look shared by officers who recognized, even without translation, that they had just been measured and found dangerous enough to be worth talking to, rather than simply destroyed. "Then let us discuss it properly," Picard said. "Face to face, if your protocols allow it. I find diplomacy carries further than threats exchanged across open space." Another pause. Vader, weighing pride against the deeper currents of strategy that had kept him alive through purges, wars, and the long shadow of his master schemes. Whatever this Federation was, however strange its weapons and stranger its philosophy, there was information to be gained, and perhaps leverage besides, in proximity. "Very well, Captain," the voice said at last. "Prepare to receive a shuttle. I will come myself. And Captain, should this prove to be a trap, you will discover that my restraint has limits." The channel closed. On the bridge of the Enterprise, Picard allowed himself a single breath of something between relief and dread, the particular sensation of a diplomat who had just bought time, without yet knowing the price. The shuttle bay of the Enterprise had hosted dignitaries from 100 worlds, Klingon ambassadors with their booming pride, Romulan envoys with their careful, knife-edged courtesy, even the occasional unsettling presence of AQ. Nothing in Starfleet protocol, however, had prepared the assembled honor guard for the sight that emerged from the boarding shuttle requisitioned from the tyrant's wake. Darth Vader stepped onto the deck, plating with the unhurried gravity of a man who had never once, in his adult life, entered a room as anything less than its most dangerous occupant. His mechanized breathing filled the bay with a slow, rhythmic hiss that seemed to draw the very air taut. 2 stormtroopers flanked him, their white armor gleaming under Federation lighting, blaster rifles held with the easy competence of soldiers who had survived 100 actual wars rather than simulated ones. Picard waited at the head of the welcoming party, flanked by Riker and Worf, his hands clasped behind his back in the posture he reserved for first contacts that might go badly. Troy stood a half-step behind him, and even from that distance, the wash of cold, controlled fury, and ancient grief she felt radiating from the cloaked figure nearly staggered her. She kept her expression neutral through long practice, but her eyes flicked once toward Picard, a silent warning that whatever this being was, it carried more darkness inside it than any ambassador she had ever met. Captain Picard. Vader's voice, modulated through his mask's vocoder, carried into the bay with mechanical precision. You requested a face. I find myself curious what species wears one so carefully composed. Lord Vader, I presume, Picard said, inclining his head with diplomatic precision rather than deference. Welcome aboard the Enterprise. Whatever brought your fleet into this region of space, I'd prefer we resolve it through conversation rather than further exchange of weapons fire. A reasonable preference, Vader said, shared, I confess, by very few who have stood where you stand now. He moved forward, the stormtroopers falling into step a precise distance behind him, and Picard noted, with the trained eye of a man who had faced down Borg, Romulans, and his own command crew's mutinies, that Vader walked like someone entirely unconcerned about being surrounded by armed strangers on an unfamiliar ship. That confidence, more than any sense or reading, told Picard everything he needed to know about the kind of power this being represented. They proceeded to the observation lounge rather than the bridge, a deliberate choice on Picard's part, a room built for negotiation rather than command, its long windows showing the quiet stars of unclaimed space. Vader took the offered seat at the head of a table with unhurried economy of motion, his presence seeming to fill the room regardless of where he sat. You are the trappings of an explorer, Vader observed, his masked gaze sweeping the room's understated elegance, the Starfleet insignia on Picard's chest. Yet your weapons did not behave like the weapons of mere wanderers. Tell me, Captain, what does your Federation actually want, beyond the comforting fiction of peaceful exploration? The truth mostly, Picard said. Knowledge. Contact with new civilizations, conducted on principles of mutual respect and self-determination. We do not conquer, Lord Vader. We do not subjugate. That distinction matters enormously to us. A low mechanical sound that might have been a laugh, had it carried any warmth, escaped Vader's mask. I have heard such words before, Captain, from senators, from Jedi, from rebels who believed their ideals made them safer than those who simply took what they needed. Ideals are a luxury afforded to those who have not yet been tested by true power. And yet, Picard said, leaning forward slightly, you came to talk rather than simply destroying us outright, despite holding what I suspect you believe is a significant advantage. That suggests even you find some value in words over weapons, at least until you understand what you're dealing with. Something in Vader's posture shifted, not capitulation, but the recalibration of a predator who had just been told, correctly, something uncomfortable about his own motives. You are perceptive, Captain. I will grant you that. Very well, I will speak plainly. My fleet was thrown into this region by means I do not yet understand, fleeing a battle in a galaxy that may no longer be reachable. I have no interest in your philosophy of self-determination, but I have considerable interest in understanding the rules of this new reality before I decide what I require from it. And if what you require runs counter to the sovereignty of the worlds in this region, Picard asked, his voice quiet but utterly without give, then we will discover, Captain, whether your Federation's ideals are as durable as your shields prove to be. Vader rose, the motion unhurried, final. I require time to study this region, its powers, its weaknesses, the shape of what opposes me. I am willing, for now, to refrain from further hostilities while I gather that understanding. Consider it a courtesy, born of curiosity rather than mercy. Picard rose as well, matching the moment's gravity without yielding an inch of his own position. I'll take that courtesy, Lord Vader, on the understanding that any aggression against Federation worlds or vessels ends this arrangement immediately and permanently. We are not without our own capabilities, whatever you may have observed of them today. A fair accounting, Captain. Vader turned toward the door, his cape sweeping with theatrical finality, then paused, glancing back with something that might, in a being capable of warmth, have resembled genuine interest. Tell me, does your Federation possess anything resembling what I would call the Force? A power that binds living things, that can be felt rather than measured. Troy, still standing near the door, felt the weight of that question land with unusual precision, as if Vader already suspected the answer mattered more than he was letting on. We have encountered phenomena that defy easy categorization, Picard said carefully. Telepathy, precognition, energy fields not fully understood by our science. Why do you ask? Because, Captain, Vader said, already moving toward his shuttle, his voice carrying back over his shoulder like a blade left deliberately unsheathed. I have felt something in this region since the moment we arrived. Something old, something watching, that I have not felt the like of since I was a very young man, on a very different kind of battlefield. I would advise your scientists to pay close attention to whatever they discover about the nature of this space. I suspect we are not the only forces newly arrived here that matter. The doors closed behind him, leaving the observation lounge unsettled in a way that had nothing to do with weapons fire at all. The findings came in over the next several hours, delivered in the careful, measured tones of officers who had spent their careers cataloging the impossible and still found themselves unsettled by what their instruments were now reporting. Captain, Geordi LaForge said, standing over the engineering display with the particular intensity of a man who had found a puzzle worth losing sleep over. I've run the analysis on the energy weapon that struck us 3 times now. It's not a directed energy weapon in any sense we use the term. It's closer to controlled plasma containment, fired in discrete bolts. By every model we have, that should be wildly unstable past a few hundred meters. It isn't. Whatever technology stabilizes that bolt, it's not anything in Federation engineering. And our phasers? Picard asked. That's the stranger part. Geordi shook his head. Their shield's deflector technology, from what little telemetry we caught, should have shrugged off a phaser strike with room to spare based on the power output we measured. Instead, we punched straight through one of their weapons' batteries. I think their shields are tuned for kinetic and thermal threats. Pure phased energy might be slipping past their defensive doctrine entirely, the same way their plasma bolts are slipping past ours. Data, seated nearby, with a data terminal already half covered in notation, added, if Geordi's analysis holds, Captain, it suggests both fleets evolved their weapons and defenses to counter threats from their own universe. Threats that do not exist in the others. Neither side is more powerful in an objective sense. Each is simply unprepared for the other's specific paradigm. Picard absorbed this in silence, turning toward the view screen where the Star Destroyer still held position, patient and watchful as a held breath. Then it's a question of who learns faster. Aboard the Tyrant's wake, that same question occupied an entirely different kind of mind. Vader stood in the ship's tactical chamber, watching holographic playback of the battle's brief exchange. His presence is silent, looming weight over the junior officers tasked with the analysis. Their deflector shields absorbed our turbolaser fire with minimal degradation, my lord, reported Commander Sailtarn, the Tyrant's Wake's chief tactical officer, a man who had survived enough briefings with Vader to keep his voice steady despite the news he carried. But our own shields failed catastrophically against a single sustained phaser strike. If their fleet brought more than one vessel to bear, we could be in genuine danger of losing ships. Then we adapt, Vader said simply. I want shield harmonics recalibrated to compensate for whatever frequency their weapons exploit. And I want our own weapons tested against a wider spread of targeting profiles. If their shields have a similar weakness to ours, I intend to find it before they find mine. It was in the quiet hours that followed, while engineers on both vessels worked through the strange new mathematics of an unfamiliar enemy's technology, that Vader felt it again, the thing he had mentioned to Picard almost as an afterthought, a half-genuine test of the Federation's awareness. A presence in the Force, vast and cold, moving somewhere beyond the edges of his perception, like a storm still gathering far over the horizon. It was not the Force he knew from his own galaxy. Not light, not dark, not anything so neatly categorized. It was something else. Something that did not feel alive in any way he recognized, and yet was unmistakably, hungrily aware. He said nothing of it to his officers. There was no profit yet in naming a fear before he understood its shape. On the Enterprise, that same unease had found its way to Counselor Troy's quarters, where she sat in contemplative stillness, trying to parse the strange resonance she'd felt radiating from Vader during their meeting, a depth of suppressed grief and rage that seemed less like personality and more like architecture, something built rather than simply felt. She had encountered powerful telepaths before, powerful empaths, even beings of staggering cosmic scale. She had never encountered something that felt quite so much like a wound dressed up as a weapon. She requested, and was granted, an audience with Picard that evening, finding him in his quarters with a cup of tea cooling, untouched, on the table before him. "Captain, I don't think Vader's threat assessment of us was his primary concern in that meeting," she said without preamble. "I think he's afraid of something else. Something he felt the moment they arrived here. And I think, whatever it is, he believes it's bigger than either of our fleets." Picard's expression sharpened with the particular focus of a man recalibrating his priorities mid-conversation. He mentioned something, an old power watching. I assumed rhetorical flourish, the kind of theater someone like him might deploy to unsettle an adversary. "I don't think it was theater, Captain," Troy said. "I think it was the truest thing he said in that entire conversation." Picard considered this for a long moment, the quiet hum of the ship's systems filling the silence between them. Whatever had torn a hole between their two realities, it seemed increasingly likely that the collision of an empire and a federation was not, in fact, the most dangerous thing now loose in this stretch of space. "Send a priority message to Starfleet Command," he said finally. "Advise them we may be dealing with more than a first contact scenario. And ask Mr. Data to expand our long-range sensor sweep. I want to know exactly what's been disturbed in this region before whatever it is finds us looking the wrong way." The trouble began, as it so often did in regions of contested space, with a hostage situation born of opportunism rather than ideology. A freighter convoy carrying Federation colonial supplies had drifted too close to the edge of Imperial claimed territory that 3 days earlier had not existed at all, but which Vader's fleet had already begun marking with the same casual confidence the Empire applied to any system it touched. A junior Imperial officer, eager to prove his initiative to a commander who valued results over excuses, ordered the convoy boarded. What should have been a simple seizure of cargo became something far messier when the convoy's captain, a stubborn, principled Bajan trader named Lauren Hask, refused to surrender his ship's logs, citing Federation maritime protections that meant nothing to men who had never heard of the Federation a week before. The standoff escalated badly. Stormtroopers, trained for compliance rather than negotiation, took Hask and 2 of his crew hostage when the situation devolved into a tense scrum on the freighter's cargo deck. By the time the Enterprise arrived in response to the convoy's distress call, the junior officer had already radioed for instructions, and Vader himself, intrigued by the prospect of testing Federation resolve under genuine pressure, had taken personal command of the situation from the bridge of a shuttle now docked alongside the freighter. "Lord Vader." Picard's voice carried across the open channel with carefully restrained urgency, the Enterprise holding position at a respectful but watchful distance. "Release the hostages. This serves no purpose beyond escalating exactly the kind of conflict you claimed not to want." "They violated Imperial space," Vader replied, his tone almost bored, as if the conversation bored him more than the violence might satisfy him. "I am simply establishing the consequences of that violation, Captain. Consider it an education in the realities of this new arrangement." It was Hask himself, in the end, who made the situation unsalvageable. Frightened, furious, and possessed of the particular courage that came from having nothing left to lose, he lunged at the nearest stormtrooper in a desperate bid to seize a weapon. The blaster discharged wide, scorching a bulkhead rather than a body, but the act of defiance was enough. Vader's hand rose, almost lazily, from across the cargo deck. Hask's body lifted from the floor, suspended in midair by a force no Federation sensor could measure or explain, his hands clawing uselessly at a throat constricted by nothing visible at all. The other hostages screamed. The Imperial officers nearby, even the stormtroopers trained to stoicism, shifted uneasily, the particular discomfort of men who had seen this exact tableau before and still found it unsettling each time. Aboard the Enterprise, sensors screamed with contradictory data. No weapon discharge, no physical contact, and yet a being's vital signs crashing in real time. Dr. Crusher, monitoring remotely, called out in alarm. "Captain, his trachea is collapsing. There's no mechanism for it. It's like something is crushing it from the inside without touching it at all. Vader, stop this, Picard said, his voice losing its diplomatic polish for the first time. Something harder and more urgent breaking through. Whatever point you're making, you've made it. Killing him serves no purpose beyond proving you're capable of cruelty, which I assure you, we already understood. A long pause. Hask's struggles weakened, his face darkening, his eyes wide with the particular terror of a man dying by means he could not comprehend. Then, with the same unhurried ease he'd used to begin it, Vader closed his hand into a fist and released it. Hask collapsed to the deck, gasping, alive, shaking with the aftershock of violence that had left no mark upon his body at all. Let this serve as your education as much as his, Vader said, turning from the trembling captain to address the calm. That, Captain Picard, was the Force. A power your science cannot measure, your shields cannot stop, and your philosophy cannot negotiate with. I did not kill him because killing him taught you nothing you didn't already suspect. But understand what I did to one man, I could do to a bridge full of officers from a distance no weapon of yours could intercept. On the bridge of the Enterprise, the silence that followed was heavy with a new and specific kind of fear, not the fear of superior firepower, which Starfleet had faced and overcome before, but the fear of a power that obeyed no law of physics anyone aboard understood. Troy's hands had gone white-knuckled against her armrest, the psychic backlash of that small, casual violence washing over her like a physical blow. "Captain," she said quietly, once the channel closed and the freighter's crew had been recovered, shaken but alive. What he just did, it wasn't an isolated technique. It's instinctive to him, like breathing. I don't think we've encountered anything in Federation space that operates on that principle. Picard stood at the center of his bridge, jaw set, processing the uncomfortable truth that the most dangerous weapon in this encounter might not be a turbolaser or a phaser bank at all. Give me everything Starfleet has on telekinetic phenomena, precognitive abilities, anything remotely resembling what we just witnessed. If this force is as fundamental to their power structure as it appears, we need to understand its limits, because right now we don't have any idea where they are. Aboard the Tyrant's wake, Vader stood at the viewport, watching the recovered freighter limp back toward Federation space, and allowed himself the rare luxury of genuine satisfaction. Fear, properly applied, was a far more efficient tool of diplomacy than any treaty. But beneath that satisfaction lingered the same cold unease he had not yet named aloud to anyone, the sense, growing sharper by the hour, that something vast and patient was drawing closer to this fractured corner of two galaxies, and that whatever the Federation's strange shields and the Empire's terrible power amounted to, neither would matter at all against what was coming. The Klingon bird of prey Hacktaj had been monitoring the contested border region for 19 hours before its commander, General Korgoth, made the decision that would define the next phase of this strange, three-cornered collision. Klingon intelligence had picked up the engagement reports almost immediately, garbled secondhand, filtered through Federation channels never meant for Klingon ears, but unmistakable in their substance. An unknown fleet, wielding weapons capable of damaging a Federation flagship, possessed of warriors who could kill with a gesture rather than a blade. To most commanders, this would have read as a warning to avoid the region entirely. To Korgoth, a warrior of the old breed who measured his career in glorious battles rather than cautious survivals, it read as opportunity. "A new enemy," he rumbled to his first officer, Tark, as the Hacktaj cut through space toward the disputed border zone, cloak engaged, sensors drinking in every scrap of data the Federation's careless communications offered. One that humbled the Federation's precious flagship without breaking a sweat. "Tell me, Tark, does that not sound like an enemy worth testing? Or worth making an ally of, if their strength proves real?" Tark, more cautious by temperament, but wise enough not to voice doubt too openly aboard his own captain's bridge, offered only, "It sounds like an enemy we know nothing about, General. Caution would serve us, as well as boldness." "Caution," Korgoth said, "is what kept the Federation soft enough to be humbled by strangers. We will not make the same error." He turned to the helm. "Decloak at the edge of their patrol routes. Let them see us. I want to look this empire in the eye before I decide whether it deserves war or alliance." The Imperial patrol that first detected the Klingon vessel's decloaking was, fittingly, the same junior officer whose overzealousness had nearly cost a hostage his life days before, a man named Lieutenant Voss Idrian, eager now to redeem his earlier failure with a flawless report. His sensors registered the bird of prey's sudden appearance with the particular alarm of someone who had, in the space of a week, gone from believing his galaxy was the only one that mattered to understanding it might be the smallest part of a much larger, much more dangerous tapestry. Unidentified vessel, decloaked, bearing 031. Idrian reported up the chain, voice tight. Configuration unlike Federation design. Weapons charged, but holding position. Vader received the report aboard the Tyrant's wake with a particular stillness that had, by now, become familiar to his officers. The calm of a predator recalculating the shape of its hunting ground. A third power, he murmured, more to himself than to the bridge crew around him. This region grows more interesting by the day. He ordered no immediate response, no hail, no provocation, simply careful observation. The same patient calculus he had applied to the Federation in those first uncertain hours. Korgoth, for his part, seemed equally content to let the silence stretch. Two predators sizing each other across the gulf of mutual unfamiliarity, until at last the Klingon general grew bored of restraint and opened a channel of his own. "I am General Korgoth of the Klingon Empire," he announced, his voice carrying the booming pride of a warrior who had never once doubted his own significance in any room he entered. "You wounded the Federation's flagship and lived to tell of it. I have come to see if the tale was exaggeration, or if you are truly the warriors your reputation suggests." "I do not deal in reputation," Vader replied. "I deal in results. If you have come seeking either war or alliance, General, I would advise clarity. I have little patience for posturing." Korgoth laughed, a genuine, booming sound that carried real pleasure rather than mockery. "Direct. I respect that more than I respect most of what passes for diplomacy out here." "Very well, clarity. Then, the Federation is soft. Honorable, perhaps, by their own measure, but soft. I have no love for them, and no particular reason to defend their borders against a power that might prove a worthier rival, or a worthier friend. Show me what you are capable of, Imperial, and I will decide which you will be to the Klingon Empire." It was, Vader reflected, a refreshingly uncomplicated proposition compared to Picard's endless invocations of principle and sovereignty. Power respected power. The Klingon, whatever else they might prove to be, at least understood that fundamental truth without needing it explained twice. "Then let us speak plainly of strength," Vader said, "and decide together what use it might be put to." Aboard the Enterprise, the report of a third, unknown power entering the equation landed with the particular weight of a development nobody had wanted and everybody had half expected. Picard listened to Worf's tactical briefing with the focused intensity of a man assembling a puzzle whose pieces kept multiplying faster than he could place them. "If the Klingon ally with the Empire," Worf said, his voice carrying the specific gravity of a warrior contemplating his own people's potential complicity in something dangerous, "it complicates everything, Captain. Klingon honor does not forbid alliance with strength, only with weakness pretending otherwise. And the Empire has shown itself anything but weak. Then we need to ensure the calculus doesn't favor that alliance," Picard said. "Counselor, what's your read on General Korgoth, based on what we know of Klingon temperament generally?" "Klingon respect strength, Captain, but they respect honor more, when it's genuine," Troy said. "If the Empire shows itself as conquerors rather than worthy rivals, even Korgoth may find the alliance less appealing than he expects. The Empire's reputation, once it spreads, may do more to isolate them than any diplomacy we could offer." Picard nodded slowly, turning the thought over with the patience of a chess player several moves ahead of his opponents, all three of them, now, in a game whose rules kept shifting beneath his feet. "Then perhaps the wisest move is not to compete for the Klingon favor at all, but to let the Empire's own nature do the work of alienating them eventually. We continue, as we are, vigilant, principled, and patient. Let Vader prove, in his own time, exactly what kind of ally he truly makes." Far beyond the awareness of any of the three powers now circling one another in cautious calculation, The vast cold presence that had unsettled both Vader and Troy continued its silent approach, drawn, with mechanical inevitability, toward the very rift that had brought an empire across the boundary of universes, hungry for exactly the kind of technological and biological diversity now gathered, however unwittingly, right in its path. The fracture within the Imperial Command structure began quietly, the way most dangerous things did aboard a Star Destroyer, not with mutiny or open defiance, but with a question asked in the wrong tone, in front of the wrong officers, at a moment when Vader's attention was elsewhere. Captain Wren had served the Empire for 11 years, had watched colleagues vanish for lesser infractions than the one he was about to commit, and still found himself unable to keep silent any longer. The briefing had concluded. The senior officers of the Tyrant's Wake and its escort wing had dispersed to their duties, save for Wren and Commander Tarn, who lingered in the tactical chamber under the pretense of reviewing sensor logs. "We're not going home, Tarn," Wren said quietly, once he was certain the chamber held no other ears. "Whatever Lord Vader tells the crew to maintain morale, there is no path back through that rift. The scientists have said as much, even if no one above engineering rank will say it aloud. We are building an empire in a galaxy we did not choose, fighting wars we did not start, for an emperor who does not even know we exist." Tarn's expression remained carefully neutral, the practiced blankness of a man who had survived long enough in Imperial service to know that agreement, even silent agreement, could be a death sentence if overheard by the wrong informant. "And what would you have us do instead, Captain? Mutiny? Lord Vader does not forgive disloyalty, regardless of how reasonably it's framed." "I'm not speaking of mutiny," Wren said, though the flicker in his eyes suggested he had at least considered it. "I'm speaking of purpose. If we are stranded here, perhaps permanently, should we not be building something worth the cost, a foothold, an understanding with these new powers, rather than simply conquering until something inevitably conquers us in turn?" The Federation showed restraint when they could have destroyed us outright in that first engagement. The Klingon offer alliance rather than war. Lord Vader treats both as obstacles to dominate rather than powers to understand. It was, Tarn reflected privately, exactly the kind of thinking that got promising officers killed, and exactly the kind of thinking that, had circumstances been only slightly different, might have made for wiser strategy than the one currently being pursued. He said nothing of his agreement aloud, but he did not report the conversation either, and that omission, small as it seemed, would prove to matter more than either officer yet understood. Vader, for his part, remained entirely unaware of the quiet fracture spreading through his command structure, his attention consumed instead by something far more urgent, the presence in the force that had haunted him since the moment his fleet tore through the rift, now grown sharp enough that he could no longer dismiss it as mere unfamiliarity with an alien dimension. He meditated alone in his personal chamber aboard the Tyrant's Wake, kneeling before nothing in particular, reaching out through the force toward the cold and patient hunger he had felt approaching for days. What answered his reaching was not the seductive whisper of the dark side, nor the serene resistance of the light. It was something that did not register as alive in any sense the force recognized at all. A void shaped like intention, a hunger without appetite, simply function. He opened his eyes sharply, the meditation broken by something that felt less like insight and more like instinct screaming a warning his conscious mind had not yet processed. He rose, moving toward the comm with uncharacteristic urgency. "Captain Wren," he said, the vocoder carrying a weight that made the younger officer straighten immediately upon hearing it, all thoughts of his earlier conversation with Tarn vanishing beneath the immediate demand of duty. "Status of long-range sensor sweeps toward the rift's point of origin." "Nothing significant reported, my lord," Wren said, checking the relevant display even as he spoke. "Though wait, there is an anomalous energy signature growing steadily. Engineering flagged it as a sensor error 12 hours ago, but it has not resolved itself. If anything, it has intensified." "That is not a sensor error," Vader said. "Contact the Federation vessel. Tell Captain Picard I require his science officer's analysis of that signature, regardless of the inconvenience to either of our pride." It was, Ren reflected with the particular vertigo of a man watching his entire understanding of his commander reorganize itself in real time. The first time Vader had ever requested Federation assistance rather than demanding Federation compliance. Whatever was approaching, it had apparently convinced even Darth Vader that pride was a luxury this moment could not afford. Aboard the Enterprise, the request arrived with enough uncharacteristic urgency in its tone that Picard authorized an immediate sensor-sharing protocol. Unusual cooperation, granted cautiously, but granted nonetheless. Data's analysis, once both fleets' data was combined, painted a picture grim enough to silence even the most skeptical voices on either side. The energy signature is consistent with technological assimilation patterns, Captain, Data reported, his tone carrying the particular gravity it reserved for genuinely catastrophic possibilities. Specifically, it bears striking resemblance to historical Borg incursion signatures, though significantly amplified, possibly due to the unusual energy properties of the rift itself. The bridge fell silent. Riker's jaw tightened. Worf's hand moved, almost unconsciously, toward his weapon. Even Picard, who had faced the Borg before and survived to bear the scars of that survival, felt something cold settle in his chest at the confirmation of what Troy's instincts and Vader's unease had both been warning of for days. "How long until it reaches this region?" Picard asked. "At current approach vectors, Captain," Data said, "approximately 31 hours. 31 hours, Picard thought, to somehow forge enough trust between a Federation, an Empire, and a Klingon warband circling one another with mutual suspicion, to survive a threat that had once brought the entire might of Starfleet to the brink of annihilation with a single cube. He keyed the comm himself this time, his voice carrying across the gulf between two galaxies with the particular clarity of a man who understood, with sudden and total certainty, exactly how high the stakes had just become. "Lord Vader, I think it's time the three of us spoke together, and quickly." The summit, when it finally convened, took place aboard a neutral platform of Picard's design, a modified cargo bay on a Federation science vessel, chosen specifically because it belonged to neither Empire nor Warband, and because its limited size made any attempt at treachery by either side a matter of immediate and obvious consequence. Vader arrived first, flanked by two stormtroopers and Captain Ren, his presence settling over the room with the same gravitational weight it carried everywhere he went. Korgoth arrived moments later, unescorted save for Tark, his booming confidence undimmed by the unfamiliar surroundings, eyeing Vader with the open, appraising curiosity of a warrior measuring a rival he had not yet decided whether to fight or follow. Picard came last, deliberately, the host arriving to a room already populated by his guests, a small gesture of respect calculated to cost nothing and signal everything. "Gentlemen," Picard said, "I won't waste time on pleasantries we don't have hours to spare for. Data, the analysis, if you please." Data's presentation was brief, precise, and utterly without embellishment. The Borg's history of assimilation, the scale of the cube approaching, the specific and terrible danger it posed not merely as a military threat, but as an existential one. Cybernetic organisms that absorb technology and biology alike into a hive mind without individuality, without negotiation, without any of the categories either Imperial or Klingon doctrine had evolved to handle. Korgoth's reaction was immediate and visceral. An enemy that does not fight for glory, conquest, or even survival in any sense a warrior understands. Only assimilation. He spat the word like a curse. There is no honor in fighting something that cannot be honored in return. But there is no honor either in dying without trying. Vader's reaction was quieter, more considered. The stillness of a man recalculating an enemy he had already sensed, but not yet fully understood. "I have felt this presence approaching for days," he said. "It does not register in the Force as life, as I understand the term. It is closer to a machine that has forgotten it was ever anything else. That makes it, in some respects, more dangerous than any enemy I have faced, and, in other respects, perhaps more vulnerable, if the right pressure is applied in the right place." "Then let's discuss that pressure," Picard said. "Because Captain, General, Lord Vader, none of our three forces alone has faced down a Borg incursion successfully without catastrophic loss. Starfleet's own engagement with a single cube at Wolf 359 cost 39 starships and over 11,000 lives. I would not wish to discover what an empire's pride or a Klingon's appetite for glorious but isolated combat costs against an enemy that does not negotiate, does not retreat, and does not fear death in any sense any of us understand. The room fell into a tense, calculating silence. Three commanders from three civilizations that had, days before, regarded one another as enemies or, at best, unknown quantities to be exploited, now facing the uncomfortable mathematics of a threat that made their mutual distrust look like luxury they could no longer afford. It was Ren uncharacteristically who spoke next, a junior voice in a room of titans. Emboldened perhaps by the conversation he'd had with Tarn days before, the one he'd thought might cost him his career or his life. My lord, if I may, whatever the political costs of cooperation, the tactical reality is this. Our weapons exploit gaps in their shields they do not expect, and there's exploit gaps in ours. Against an enemy as adaptive as the Borg, that diversity of approach may be our greatest asset, if we coordinate it, rather than waste it on mutual suspicion. Vader regarded his captain for a long moment, and something in his posture, invisible behind the mask, but perceptible nonetheless to those who had learned to read him through stillness alone, suggested a flicker of something that might, in a more forgiving man, have been called approval. My captain speaks sense, even if his timing leaves something to be desired. He turned back to Picard and Korgoth. I propose this, a temporary alliance, bound by necessity rather than trust. Our fleets coordinate against the Borg incursion. Once it is repelled, or once we are all dead, which seems the more likely alternative given the alternative's track record, we return to whatever enmity or negotiation suits us best. A temporary alliance bound by mutual survival rather than mutual trust, Picard said slowly, turning the phrase over with the particular care of a diplomat aware that he was, in this moment, making history of an entirely unprecedented kind. I can accept those terms, Lord Vader. General Korgoth. Korgoth grinned, a fierce and genuine expression that carried the particular relish of a warrior who had just been offered the single thing he valued above all else, a battle worth fighting, against an enemy worth dying to stop. An enemy that respects no honor, fought by an alliance bound by none of our usual codes. There is a poetry to that I find difficult to resist, Captain. The Klingon Empire will fight beside you both, for now. The three commanders did not shake hands, did not embrace the moment with any false warmth or sentiment. But as the summit dissolved into the urgent, practical work of coordinating three fleets' worth of incompatible technology, incompatible doctrine, and deeply incompatible philosophy into something resembling a unified defense, Picard allowed himself a single, grim moment of reflection on the strange shape diplomacy sometimes took, not born of shared values, but of shared mortality, which proved, in the end, a far more universal language than any treaty ever drafted. 31 hours had become 26. Somewhere in the dark beyond all their sensors, the cube continued its patient, hungry approach, utterly indifferent to the fragile, furious alliance now scrambling to meet it. The Borg cube emerged from subspace exactly as Data's projections had predicted. Vast, geometric, indifferent, its hull a patchwork of dark metal and pulsing green conduits that seemed less constructed than grown, the way a tumor grows rather than the way a ship is built. It did not announce itself with hails or warnings. It simply arrived and began, almost immediately, the slow and terrible work of analyzing every vessel within sensor range for assimilation. The combined fleet, Federation, Imperial, Klingon, arranged in a formation none of their respective doctrines had ever contemplated, held position at the edge of the cube's projected engagement envelope, three civilizations worth of pride and suspicion compressed into a single tactical network for the first time in any of their histories. "They are hailing us," Worf reported from the Enterprise-S tactical station, his voice carrying the particular flatness of a man delivering news he already knew would bring no comfort. "The message is the same as always, Captain." The cube's voice, when it came, carried across all three fleets' communication channels simultaneously, a chorus of dead, layered tones that managed to sound both singular and legion at once. Asterisk, we are the Borg. Your biological and technological distinctiveness will be added to our own. Resistance is futile. Asterisk. Predictable, Vader said over the Joint Command Channel, his tone carrying something almost like contempt, the particular disdain of a man who valued ambition and individual will above almost everything else, confronted now with an enemy that possessed neither. Then let us demonstrate the cost of that arrogance. Captain Picard, your fleet sensors have the clearest data on this enemy's defensive patterns. I defer tactical coordination to your judgment for now. It was, Picard reflected, a remarkable concession from a man who had spent their first meeting making clear he deferred to no one, but necessity, as Vader himself had observed, made for strange and humbling alliances. Understood, Lord Vader. Their shields adapt to repeated weapon types. We need variation, not concentration. Klingon disruptors, Imperial turbolasers, and Federation phasers in alternating sequence, focused on a single section of hull, faster than their adaptive algorithms can compensate. A worthy strategy, Korgoth rumbled, already relaying orders to his own ships. Let us see how their precious assimilation algorithms enjoy facing 3 different kinds of death in the same heartbeat. The battle that followed was unlike anything any of the 3 fleets had fought before, not merely in its violence, though that was considerable, but in the strange, improvised choreography of weapons never designed to work in concert, suddenly finding, through desperation and necessity, a rhythm that worked. Klingon disruptor fire scored the cube's hull in jagged emerald wounds. Imperial turbolasers, recalibrated through hours of frantic engineering, found gaps the cube's adaptive shields had not yet learned to close. Federation phasers, precise and surgical, exploited weaknesses opened by the other 2 in the brief windows before the Borg's collective intelligence could compensate. It was not enough. It was never going to be enough through brute force alone, and every commander in that engagement understood it within the first 10 minutes of sustained combat. The cube's return fire was relentless, methodical, indifferent to losses in a way no organic military doctrine had ever truly prepared for. 3 TIE fighters vaporized in a single volley, a Klingon escort vessel crippled and boarded by assimilation drones within minutes. The Enterprise itself rocked by a tractor beam lock that began, with horrifying patience, to draw the flagship toward the cube's surface. It was Vader who broke the stalemate in the end, not through tactics, but through something that belonged to neither Federation science, nor Klingon ferocity, nor Imperial doctrine at all. He stood on the bridge of the tyrant's wake, eyes closed behind his mask, reaching through the Force toward the tractor beam locked onto the Enterprise, not to fight it directly, which even he understood lay beyond even his considerable power, but to find, within its mechanical structure, the same kind of flaw the Force had always shown him in living things. The seam where intention met execution, where a system's purpose could be turned, subtly, against itself. Captain Picard, he said over the comm, his voice strained in a way none of his officers had ever heard before, your tractor beam emitters. If you reverse polarity at my signal, precisely, I believe I can disrupt the lock entirely. I cannot promise the method. I can promise the timing. Picard, with no better option and dwindling seconds, made the only choice available to them. Do it. What followed defied easy explanation by anyone who witnessed it. Sensors registered a brief, inexplicable fluctuation in the tractor beam's containment field at the exact moment Vader's reverse polarity command took effect, as though something unseen had reached into the beam structure and, with surgical and impossible precision, pulled it apart from the inside. The Enterprise broke free, scarred but intact. At the same instant, the combined fleet's coordinated barrage finally found purchase on a weakened section of the cube's hull. The explosion that followed was not victory, not yet, but it was the first wound the Borg cube had suffered that it could not immediately compensate for, a cascading failure spreading through its damaged systems, faster than its collective mind could adapt. 3 civilizations' worth of desperate, improvised, deeply unlikely cooperation had bought, in that single moment, the only thing that mattered, a chance. Press the advantage, Picard said, his voice carrying across all 3 fleets with the particular clarity of a commander who understood that the next 60 seconds would decide everything. All ships, concentrate fire on the breach. Now, the breach widened with the terrible momentum of a wound that had finally found a way to bleed faster than it could heal. Concentrated fire from 3 fleets that had been enemies, strangers, and reluctant allies within the span of a single-week tour through the Borg cube's compromised hull section, each volley finding less resistance than the last, as the vessel's distributed intelligence struggled and failed to reroute power and shielding fast enough to compensate. Aboard the Tyrant's wake, Vader remained locked in his strange, half-trance state, one hand extended toward the tactical display, as though physically holding open the wound he had carved in the enemy's defenses through means no engineer aboard could fully explain. The strain was visible even through his mask's impassive design, his breathing already mechanical, carrying a labored edge that made Captain Wren glance toward him with something approaching genuine concern. "My lord, your condition is irrelevant until this is finished," Vader said, though the words cost him visibly more than they once would have. The Force in this universe behaved strangely, thinner in places, resistant in others, and holding open a structural flaw in a vast cybernetic intelligence, while 3 fleets poured fire through the gap, was unlike anything even his considerable discipline had trained him for. But he held it because the alternative, releasing his grip and allowing the cube's adaptive systems to seal the breach, was a cost he was unwilling to let his new and temporary allies pay. On the Enterprise, Data's analysis carried the particular note of cautious optimism that, in a being incapable of false hope, meant something had genuinely shifted in their favor. "Captain, the cube's defensive coordination is degrading rapidly. Whatever mechanism Lord Vader is employing, it appears to be preventing the vessel's collective intelligence from properly compensating for damage. I estimate critical structural failure within minutes if current fire rates are maintained." "Then let's not give them those minutes to recover," Picard said. "Worf, divert auxiliary power to weapons. General Korgoth, can your ships press closer without exposing themselves to counterfire?" "Klingon do not ask whether we can," Korgoth's voice boomed back, fierce with the particular joy of a warrior watching an unkillable enemy, finally, genuinely begin to die. "We simply do." The bird of prey and its escort winged dove closer, disruptor fire concentrated with brutal precision into the widening breach, joined moments later by a final, devastating barrage of Imperial turbolaser fire that found, at last, something resembling the cube's central processing architecture. A vulnerability no single fleet could have located alone, but which the combined sensor data and tactical improvisation of 3 incompatible militaries had, through desperation and necessity, finally exposed. The cube did not explode so much as it simply ceased, its vast geometric form going dark in stages, section by section, the eerie green pulse of its internal systems fading like a dying ember, until what remained was an inert, drifting hulk where moments before an existential threat to 3 civilizations had loomed. The silence that followed across all 3 fleets' command channels carried a different weight than any silence before it, not the wary stillness of mutual suspicion, but the particular hush of beings who had just survived something together that none of them could have survived alone, and who were not yet certain what that survival obligated them to feel about one another. It was Picard who spoke first. "Lord Vader, are you functional?" Vader said, though the single word carried an exhaustion that even his vocoder couldn't fully disguise. He had released the strange and costly grip on the Force the moment the cube systems failed, and the toll of that effort settled over him now like a physical weight, a reminder that even his considerable power had limits this universe seemed determined to test more harshly than his own ever had. The threat is neutralized. That is what matters. In the hours that followed, as damage reports were tallied and the dead, Federation, Imperial, and Klingon alike, were counted with the particular grief that came easier between former enemies than it ever did in victory alone, the 3 commanders convened once more, this time without the urgent pressure of imminent annihilation forcing their cooperation. "The Alliance was bound by necessity," Picard said, choosing his words with care. "That necessity has passed. I won't pretend our underlying differences have resolved themselves in a single battle, Lord Vader. Your Empire's methods remain fundamentally incompatible with everything the Federation stands for." "Nor do I expect they will resolve," Vader replied. "I have not become a convert to your philosophy of self-determination, Captain, nor do I imagine you have developed any newfound respect for the Empire's methods of governance. But I find myself, against considerable expectation, unwilling to dismiss entirely the value of what was built here in crisis. Perhaps that is worth preserving in smaller measure, even once the larger necessity has passed. Korgoth, characteristically, found the simplest summation. We fought well together. That is worth remembering, whatever comes after. The Federation showed more spine than I expected. The Empire showed more cunning than even their reputation suggested. And the Klingon Empire, he grinned fiercely, showed exactly what everyone already knew. We are formidable allies when an enemy worth fighting presents itself. No formal treaty was signed that day. No grand alliance was declared. But as the three fleets parted ways, Federation toward continued exploration, Klingon toward their own contested ambitions, and an Imperial fleet toward the slow, uncertain work of building something resembling a future in a galaxy that had never expected them and would not soon forget them. Each carried away an understanding that had not existed a week before, that the universe, whichever one they currently occupied, was larger and stranger than any single doctrine, philosophy, or empire could fully master alone. The rift, scientists on all three sides would eventually confirm, had sealed itself permanently in the aftermath of the battle. The energies that sustained it consumed in the same cataclysmic exchange that had destroyed the Borg cube. There would be no going home, not for Vader, not for his fleet, not for the Empire's ambitions, in a galaxy that no longer had any path back to the one it came from. But there would, perhaps, be something else. Something neither conquest nor compliance, neither light side nor dark, neither Federation idealism nor Imperial ambition alone. Something new, forged in the brief, unlikely crucible of three civilizations who had discovered, against every expectation, that survival sometimes demanded a kind of cooperation no philosophy had ever quite prepared them for. The dust of battle settled slowly across that fractured stretch of space, but the questions it left behind would linger far longer than any wreckage. For Darth Vader, the realization that no path home existed carried a weight even he had not fully anticipated. He had spent his life as an instrument of an empire and an emperor whose reach he had never questioned, whose purpose had defined every choice he'd made since the man called Anakin Skywalker had ceased to exist in any meaningful sense. Here, in a galaxy that owed the Emperor no fealty and recognized no Sith doctrine as law, that purpose required redefinition. He would not become some gentler version of himself. The force that answered him remained as dark and as costly as it had always been, and the ambitions that drove him had not softened merely because the audience for them had changed. But the cooperation forged in crisis had taught him something he would not easily forget, that even an instrument of conquest required, occasionally, something other instruments couldn't provide. Whatever empire he built now, in this displaced fragment of his fleet's existence, would be built with that lesson held close, whether he ever admitted it aloud or not. Captain Wren, for his part, found himself elevated, quietly, without fanfare, to a position of greater trust within Vader's command structure. His earlier moment of dangerous honesty with Commander Tarn never reported, never punished, perhaps even quietly respected by a master who valued usefulness over blind obedience more than his reputation suggested. The fracture within Imperial ranks did not heal so much as it found, in the Alliance's necessity, a different kind of purpose. Officers who had begun questioning their Emperor's doctrine from a galaxy away now found themselves building something new instead, neither rebellion nor blind loyalty, but a third path neither they nor their distant Emperor had ever anticipated. For Jean-Luc Picard, the experience left a different kind of mark, the uncomfortable knowledge that Federation idealism, however genuinely held, had survived its first true test against an authoritarian power not through the strength of its principles alone, but through the brutal necessity of mutual survival against something worse than either of them. He would carry that knowledge forward carefully, neither abandoning the values that defined the Federation, nor pretending those values alone would always be sufficient against threats that respected no philosophy but power. The Federation's relationship with this displaced fragment of an empire would remain wary, watchful, and uneasy, but it would not, for now, be one of open war, and Picard understood well enough that this in itself counted as a kind of victory. however modest. General Korgoth returned to Klingon space with stories that would grow, as Klingon stories always did in the retelling. Tales of an empire from beyond the stars, of warriors who killed with thought alone, of a battle against an enemy that could not be honored but could, with sufficient cunning and courage, still be defeated. Whatever future held between the Klingon Empire and this strange new imperial power, Korgoth suspected, correctly, that it would prove far more interesting than peace alone could offer. And somewhere in the depths of a galaxy that had not asked for any of this, a star destroyer drifted at the edge of Federation space, its commander standing once more before its viewport, watching unfamiliar stars arrange themselves into constellations he was only beginning to learn. The empire he served had crossed an impossible distance and found itself, against every expectation, neither conqueror nor conquered, but something stranger and more uncertain than either, a power without an emperor's oversight, building a future in a galaxy that had never heard the word Sith or Jedi, and would, perhaps, come to define them on its own unprecedented terms entirely. The Force, thin and strange in this new reality, stirred faintly at the edges of his perception, patient, watchful, and entirely uncertain what it would become here, in a galaxy never meant to know it at all.